They thought they were removing a problem from the crowd, but before the night was over, the entire city would learn exactly who they had put in handcuffs. The music was so loud it seemed to shake the summer air itself, rolling across the open concert lawn in waves of bass and light. Blue and gold beams swept over thousands of faces, over raised phones and plastic cups, over couples swaying shoulder to shoulder and friends shouting lyrics into the warm night sky. It was one of those downtown events people talked about for weeks afterward, the kind with food trucks lined up for half a mile, luxury tents near the stage, and city officials quietly drifting in and out of the VIP section while the rest of the crowd pressed against the barricades for a better view. Naomi Carter moved through it all with calm, measured grace, her navy evening dress catching the glow of the stage lights every time she turned. She wasn't trying to be seen. If anything, she had mastered the art of carrying herself with quiet confidence, the kind that never begged for attention and never needed permission. In one hand, she held her phone with the digital invitation still open. In the other, she carried a small cream-colored clutch. Her heels clicked softly against the temporary flooring laid over the grass as she approached the VIP entrance, where a young event hostess had already checked her name once and offered a polite smile. For a moment, it seemed like the night might unfold exactly as planned. A few songs, a few introductions, maybe a brief appearance beside her husband later once he arrived from a delayed meeting at City Hall. Nothing dramatic, nothing memorable, just music, lights, and one rare evening where she could breathe without cameras or speeches. But some nights turn without warning. Some nights the shift happens in a single glance. Naomi felt it before she fully understood it, that subtle change in the air when someone decides you do not belong. A tall officer near the side gate had been watching her for the last several seconds with the kind of stare that didn't ask questions so much as reach conclusions. His name tag read Ryan Hayes. Beside him stood another officer, Travis Cole, scanning wristbands and speaking into a shoulder radio. Naomi slowed her steps, her expression composed, because she had seen this look before in other rooms, other neighborhoods, other polished spaces where her presence seemed to bother people more than any actual behavior ever could. Officer Hayes stepped forward and lifted a hand, not aggressively, but with enough sharp authority to stop her cold. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," he said, his tone clipped, public, and just loud enough for nearby guests to turn their heads. Naomi raised her phone slightly. "I have a credentialed invitation," she replied evenly. "I'm on the guest list." Hayes barely glanced at the screen. His eyes moved over her face, her dress, her posture, as if he had already decided the answer before the question finished forming. Around them, the concert kept roaring on, but something smaller and more dangerous had begun to build in the narrow space by the gate. A few strangers slowed down. A woman near the rope line stopped sipping her drink. Someone lifted a phone, sensing friction the way crowds always do. Naomi kept her shoulders straight. "You can verify my name with the event coordinator," she said, still calm, still dignified, still giving the situation every chance to correct itself. But Officer Hayes did not call for a coordinator. He did not check the tablet at the entrance. He only narrowed his eyes and took one step closer, the badge on his chest catching the stage light like a warning. Naomi did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She only held her phone a little higher so the brightness of the screen could cut through the dim wash of concert lights between them. The digital invitation was clear, marked with the city seal and the event credentials that should have ended the misunderstanding in less than 10 seconds. But Officer Hayes looked at it the way a man looks at something he has already chosen not to believe. The bass from the main stage rolled through the ground beneath their feet, making the metal barricades hum faintly as the crowd surged and settled in waves. Somewhere in the distance, the singer on stage hit a chorus the audience knew by heart, and a roar of voices rose into the humid night. Yet inside the narrow space near the VIP gate, the mood had changed completely. It felt colder there, tighter, like the air itself had stopped moving. "I need you to move away from this entrance," Hayes said, more firmly now, his hand hovering near his duty belt in a gesture that was less about safety than control. Naomi kept her eyes on him. "I am not refusing to cooperate," she said. Her tone was measured, almost careful, the tone of someone who understood exactly how quickly dignity could be twisted into defiance in the wrong ears. I am asking you to verify the invitation in your system. Travis Cole shifted beside the rope line and finally glanced at the screen in her hand, but only for a second. His hesitation was brief, almost invisible, and then it was gone. Hayes had already taken the lead, and everyone around them could feel it. A middle-aged couple slowed near the gate. A young woman in silver boots lowered her phone from the stage and pointed it toward Naomi instead. Two men wearing all-access laminates exchanged a look and kept walking, choosing the oldest rule in any public humiliation: do not get involved. Naomi felt every set of eyes without turning her head toward any of them. That was the worst part of moments like this, not always the accusation itself, but the audience it gathered. The quiet judgment, the curiosity, the way strangers could watch a woman be reduced in real time and still tell themselves they were only witnessing procedure. Hayes extended his arm toward the side, gesturing for her to leave the entrance lane. "You are causing a disruption," he said. Naomi almost blinked at that, not because it shocked her, but because of how familiar it sounded. She had barely spoken above the music. She had not argued. She had not made a scene. And still, somehow, the disruption had become her. "A disruption?" she repeated softly, more to the moment than to the man. Her face remained composed, but inside, something old and painful stirred. It was the memory of being watched in stores that could clearly afford her business. It was the memory of being spoken over at civic dinners until someone realized her last name. It was the exhausting weight of knowing that in America, even elegance could be treated like suspicion when wrapped in the wrong skin. "Call your supervisor," she said, "or call the event coordinator. My name is Naomi Carter." For the first time, Hayes gave the name a reaction, but not the one reason should have produced. His mouth tightened, and a faint smile touched the corner of it, the kind of smile that did not come from amusement, but from disbelief sharpened by ego. "Ma'am," he said, stressing the word in a way that made it sound less respectful than dismissive, "I am giving you a lawful direction." Naomi heard someone nearby whisper, "What is happening?" Another voice answered, "I do not know, but she must have done something." That sentence landed harder than the officer's tone ever could. She turned her head slightly then, just enough to see the faces gathering beyond the rope, lit by flashing stage color and cell phone screens. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked entertained. A few looked relieved that, for once, the spotlight had found somebody else. Naomi drew one slow breath, the kind you take when you know the next 10 seconds may decide the shape of the whole night. Then she lowered her phone just enough to meet Officer Hayes' stare without anything between them, and when she spoke again, her voice was calm enough to make the tension around them feel even sharper. "You still have time," she said. "Do not turn a mistake into something bigger." For one suspended second, even the noise of the concert seemed to fade behind the look on Officer Hayes' face. It was the look of a man who had just been challenged in public and had no intention of stepping back from it. Around them, the crowd thickened by inches, drawn not by understanding but by instinct. The same instinct that makes people slow down on a highway just to stare at someone else's wreckage. The stage lights swept over the entrance again, painting Naomi's face in blue, then purple, then white, while the giant video screens near the lawn flashed images of cheering fans who had no idea a different kind of performance was unfolding 20 yards away. Hayes leaned in, just enough to make the moment feel personal. "You do not tell me what to do," he said, each word clipped and deliberate. "You were told to leave a restricted area. Now you are refusing direct instructions." Naomi could hear the strain in his voice, not fear exactly, but irritation sharpened by the presence of witnesses. He wanted control, and worse than that, he wanted the crowd to see him keep it. Travis Cole shifted uncomfortably beside him and touched the radio clip to his shoulder, but he still did not intervene. Naomi noticed that too. Men like Hayes did not act alone in moments like this. Sometimes the loudest harm came from one person. Sometimes it came from the silence that stood next to him and let it happen. "I am standing exactly where event staff told me to stand," Naomi replied. She spoke with the same steady restraint, but her heartbeat had started to climb now, not because she was unsure of herself, but because she knew this pattern. She knew the dangerous way a lie could build authority if spoken confidently enough by the right person in uniform. "Then event staff made a mistake," Hayes said. He held out his hand. "Give me the phone." Naomi's fingers tightened around it. "No," she said, not loudly, but with enough certainty to make the surrounding whispers jump. That one word moved through the bystanders like a spark through dry grass. A few people drew closer. More phones rose into the air. Somebody behind the rope line murmured, "She is making it worse." Another voice answered, "She should just leave." Naomi did not turn toward either of them. She had learned a long time ago that public opinion often rushed to comfort authority before it ever questioned abuse. Hayes took a half step forward. "You are interfering with security operations." Naomi almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but the ache in her chest was too heavy for that. Interfering, disrupting, resisting. There was always a word ready, always some polished term that could strip away context and make dignity sound dangerous. She glanced past him for the briefest moment and saw the hostess from earlier near the check-in podium, her eyes wide with uncertainty. The young woman recognized her. Naomi could tell. But recognition was not the same as courage, and courage was often in short supply when badges entered the frame. On the stage, fireworks shot briefly into the air behind the headliner, sending silver sparks above the crowd. The audience erupted. For an instant, the whole park glowed bright as day, and in that flash Naomi saw everything at once. The phones recording her, the guests pretending not to stare, the city logo on the nearby banner fluttering beside a slogan about unity and belonging. The irony was so sharp it nearly took her breath away. She looked back at Hayes, and her voice softened rather than hardened, which somehow made the moment feel even more serious. "Officer," she said, "this is your last chance to slow down and do this the right way." Instead of hearing the warning, he heard resistance. Instead of hearing reason, he heard a black woman refusing to shrink in front of him. His jaw tightened. Travis finally spoke, low enough that only those closest could hear. "Ryan, maybe we should run the name." But Hayes had gone too far inward now, into that private place where ego drowns out procedure. He lifted his chin toward Naomi and made a small motion with his hand that changed everything. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "turn around." Naomi did not move. For a moment, she simply stood there beneath the sweep of colored lights, her phone still in one hand, her chin lifted, her face calm in a way that made the tension around her feel almost unbearable. The command hung between them like something heavy and final. "Turn around." 2 words. That was all it took for the crowd to understand that this had crossed into something far more serious than a misunderstanding at a gate. A murmur moved through the people nearest the rope line, low and uneasy, while the music from the main stage kept thundering through the park as if joy and humiliation could occupy the same patch of ground without touching. Naomi's eyes stayed on Officer Hayes. "I have done nothing wrong," she said. Her voice was even, but there was steel in it now, the kind born not from anger alone, but from experience. "You have not verified my name. You have not checked my invitation. You have skipped every step that would have prevented this." Hayes gave her the kind of smile that was not really a smile at all. It was a warning disguised as certainty. "Turn around," he repeated, louder this time, making sure the people filming could hear him. Naomi felt her heartbeat in her throat. Not panic. Not yet. Something sadder than that. Something older. The deep, familiar ache of realizing that truth was no longer the thing in charge. Around them, phones rose higher. The young hostess by the check-in podium took one uncertain step forward, then stopped when Travis Cole shook his head almost imperceptibly. The message was clear. Stay out of it. Let it happen. The crowd, like so many crowds before it, became a wall of witnesses waiting to see how far power would go once it had been challenged. Naomi drew in a careful breath, slow enough to steady the shaking that threatened to begin in her hands. She lowered the phone to her side. "You are making a public mistake," she said. "And there are cameras everywhere." For the first time, Hayes glanced around at the lenses pointed in his direction, but whatever caution might have reached him lasted less than a second. He had already committed himself to the story in his own head. He was not confronting a guest with credentials. He was confronting a problem, a disruption, a woman he believed needed to be put in her place before the crowd. "Ma'am, failure to comply will leave me no choice," he said. Naomi almost closed her eyes at the phrase because it was always the same, always framed as inevitability, as though choices had not been available the entire time. Verification had been a choice. Professionalism had been a choice. Humility had been a choice. But those choices required him to see her as fully human first, and that had been the missing piece from the very beginning. I am complying with reason, Naomi said quietly. I am refusing humiliation. The words landed harder than she intended. A man near the rope line muttered, "Wow." A woman beside him whispered, "This is not right." Yet no one stepped forward. No one called out that her name had already been checked. No one asked why the invitation had not been scanned again. It was easier to record than to risk. Easier to stare than to stand. Hayes reached for her wrist. The gesture was brisk, practiced, and public, meant as much for the crowd as for Naomi herself. She stiffened at the contact, not out of struggle, but out of shock at how quickly the line had vanished between suspicion and spectacle. Her clutch slipped from her fingers and landed on the flooring with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than the music for a single awful second. Gasps flickered through the bystanders. Naomi looked down at it, then back up, and something changed in her face. Not fear, not surrender, just a terrible disappointment, like she had hoped until the last possible moment that decency would interrupt this before it became irreversible. Travis stepped closer now, his mouth tight, his eyes darting from Naomi to the gathering crowd to the radios on nearby shoulders. "Ryan," he said under his breath, "we need to slow this down." But Hayes was past slowing down. The need to be right had taken over. He guided Naomi's arms behind her back as the crowd pressed in and the stage lights flashed again across city banners promising dignity, inclusion, and community. Then, with cameras recording and strangers staring and the night air suddenly feeling too thin to breathe, the metallic click of handcuffs cut through the music like a sentence. The sound of the handcuffs did something the music could not drown out. It cut through the air with a cold, final clarity that made the people nearest the entrance fall silent for half a breath before the whispering started again. Naomi stood perfectly still, her wrists secured behind her back, her shoulders square, her face lit by the restless sweep of stage lights and phone screens. She did not beg. She did not plead. She did not give Officer Hayes the collapse he seemed to expect. But inside her chest, humiliation spread hot and sharp, not because strangers were watching, but because she knew exactly what they thought they were watching. To them, it looked like enforcement. Procedure. Another woman being handled by men in uniform for reasons they would assume made sense. And that was how it always survived, did it not? Not just through cruelty, but through the easy acceptance of people who decided they had seen enough to stop asking questions. "Ma'am, walk," Hayes said, guiding her away from the VIP entrance and toward the side security lane. Naomi took one step, then another, the heels of her shoes clicking against the temporary flooring with painful precision. Her clutch still lay where it had fallen until the young hostess hurried forward and picked it up, clutching it to her chest like evidence of her own delayed conscience. Travis Cole walked on the other side now, his expression drawn tight, saying nothing while everything around them got louder. A man near the rope line called out, "What did she do?" No one answered him directly, but that did not stop the guesses. Probably fake credentials. She was arguing with police. I knew something was off. Naomi heard every word. Each one landed like a small stone, not enough alone to crush a person, but together forming the weight of public shame. Then, through the blur of faces, one voice rose above the rest. "That is Naomi Carter," a woman said, sharp with alarm. It was Monica Reed, the event MC, standing near the side access corridor with her headset crooked against her hair and disbelief written all over her face. She pushed past a pair of volunteers and stared at Naomi as if the scene in front of her made no sense. "Officer, wait," Monica said, hurrying closer. "She is supposed to be here." Hayes did not stop walking. "Ma'am, step back," he said without turning. Monica did not step back. "No, listen to me. She is on the official list. She is part of the mayor's guest party." The words did not just hang in the air. They detonated in it. Naomi saw the reaction ripple outward before Hayes even slowed. Heads turned. Phones lifted higher. Somewhere behind them, a volunteer gasped out loud. Travis looked at Monica, then at Naomi, then at Hayes, and for the first time real doubt showed openly on his face. But Hayes only stiffened, the way men do when truth arrives too late and threatens to expose what they have already done. "Then she should have said that earlier," he replied. Still moving, still trying to drag the moment forward before it could catch up to him. Naomi let out a breath that trembled despite all her effort to keep it steady. She turned her head just enough to look at Monica. "I did," she said softly. Monica's face changed at those 3 words. The shock in her eyes gave way to something else now, something heavier and angrier because it carried recognition. She knew Naomi. She knew the invitation had been approved. She knew this was not confusion. This was disregard. A city banner fluttered above the lane, bright with slogans about unity, equity, and shared belonging, while beneath it a black woman in an evening dress stood handcuffed in front of half the park. The contradiction was so grotesque it seemed almost staged. Monica reached for her radio with shaking fingers. "Give me the security director right now," she snapped. "And find out where Mayor Carter is." At the sound of that name, everything shifted. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Naomi felt it in the silence that followed, in the way the whispers changed shape, in the way Officer Hayes finally stopped walking. For the first time all night, the confidence in his posture cracked, just barely, like a fault line appearing under polished concrete. And still Naomi stood there, wrists restrained, eyes dry, dignity somehow unbroken, while the truth began moving toward them faster than anyone in that lane was ready for. For a few strained seconds, no one seemed to know what to do with the truth now hanging in the air. The concert still thundered on behind them, the singer's voice soaring over speakers the size of small cars, fireworks bursting in silver fans above the stage, the crowd cheering for a moment that felt 1,000 miles away from the one unfolding near the security lane. But inside that narrow strip of pavement and barricades, everything had slowed. Officer Hayes stood rigid, one hand still near Naomi's arm, as if he could somehow hold the moment in place and stop it from becoming what it already was. Monica Reed's headset crackled with frantic voices from production, security, and the city liaison team, all speaking over one another. "Say that again," she snapped into the microphone clipped near her cheek. "Yes, right now. I need confirmation on the mayor's arrival route, and I need the site director at the East Lane immediately." Travis Cole stepped back half a pace, his face drained of whatever confidence had been there before. He looked at Naomi now not as a problem, not as a disruption, but as a person he had failed to protect from a mistake that had become something far uglier than error. Naomi stood in the center of it all with a stillness that no one around her seemed to deserve. Her wrists ached. Her dignity did not. She lifted her eyes toward Monica, then toward the crowd gathering thicker beyond the barriers, and what struck her most was not the shock on their faces, but the sudden scramble to rewrite what they had just witnessed. People who had whispered that she must have done something were now whispering something else. People who had recorded in silence were suddenly murmuring that the officers should have checked first. It was amazing how quickly certainty changed shape once power entered the picture with a familiar name attached to it. Naomi knew that too. She knew what it meant for respect to arrive only after status had been revealed. And the knowledge sat bitter on her tongue because it confirmed what she had felt from the first glance at that gate. If she had not been connected to the mayor, would any of this have stopped at all? Would anyone have cared enough to intervene? Would Monica's voice have carried the same urgency? Those questions settled deep in her chest, even as the answer moved toward them. A black SUV rolled through the service lane beyond the temporary fencing, followed by another, both moving with the unmistakable precision of official transport. Security staff at the far end straightened instantly. Radios lit up. Volunteers stepped aside. The current of panic that had started as a whisper now became visible, moving from staff member to staff member like a storm crossing open water. Monica turned toward the lane, then back to Naomi, and for a moment her expression was not just apologetic. It was ashamed. "I am so sorry," she said, voice low enough that only Naomi could hear. Naomi gave the faintest nod, not because the apology fixed anything, but because she was too tired in that moment to carry someone else's guilt along with her own humiliation. Officer Hayes finally removed his hand and took one slow step back. It should have happened minutes ago. It should never have happened at all. But now even that small retreat felt loaded, watched, documented from 10 different angles by phones that had not stopped recording since the handcuffs clicked shut. Travis leaned toward him and said, barely above a whisper, "We need to take them off. Right now." Hayes did not answer. His eyes had locked on the approaching vehicles, and Naomi saw it then, plain as the lights flashing across the lane. Not remorse. Not yet. Just the first cold crack of realization. The first glimpse of consequence. The doors of the lead SUV opened, and several members of the mayor's security detail stepped out first, scanning the area with disciplined, controlled urgency. Behind them came Daniel Carter, tall, broad-shouldered, still wearing the navy suit jacket from his city meeting, his tie slightly loosened, his expression unreadable until he saw Naomi. Then everything changed. He did not run. He did not shout. He moved with the terrifying calm of a man who had just seen something he would never forget. The noise of the concert faded into a distant blur as he crossed the last few yards under the harsh white spill of the security lights, his gaze fixed on the woman standing in cuffs at the center of a city event built on promises of pride and belonging. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low enough to force everyone around him to listen. Daniel Carter stopped 3 feet in front of Naomi and looked first at the handcuffs, then at her face, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything the speakers on the main stage could produce. Around them, the city's celebration still blazed with light and music, but in that narrow lane every eye had shifted to him now, to the man whose name carried across council chambers, press briefings, and campaign banners, and who was at this moment staring at his wife as though the world had tilted off its axis. Naomi held his gaze with quiet steadiness. She did not break. She did not rush to explain. She did not need to. The truth was already written across the scene in plain view for anyone willing to look at it honestly. Daniel's jaw tightened once, the only outward sign of the emotion moving beneath his calm. Then he turned to Officer Hayes, and when he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, and sharper for the fact that it never needed to rise. "Take the cuffs off my wife. Now." The words traveled through the lane like a current. Monica Reed drew in a breath so quick it was nearly a gasp. Travis Cole moved instantly, his hands already reaching for the restraints with an urgency that made clear he had wanted this moment to come several minutes earlier. Hayes did not move right away. That hesitation, brief as it was, told its own story. It told the story of a man who had built the entire night on his own certainty and now stood face to face with the cost of it. One of Daniel's security officers stepped forward, not threatening, not dramatic, simply present enough to make the line of authority unmistakable. "Officer," Daniel said again, never taking his eyes off Hayes, "I will not repeat myself." That was when the illusion finally collapsed. Travis removed the handcuffs with hands that trembled just enough to betray him. Naomi brought her arms slowly back to her sides, rolling her wrists once as if to restore feeling not only to her skin, but to the dignity the night had tried to strip from her in public. Daniel took one step toward her then, not to make a scene, not to turn the moment sentimental, but to stand where he should have been allowed to trust the city already knew how to stand for her. "Are you all right?" he asked. Naomi looked at him for a second, and in that second every unspoken thing passed between them. The humiliation, the anger, the exhaustion, the familiar knowledge that this had not happened because of confusion alone. "I will be," she said. Her voice was calm, but the pain beneath it was impossible to miss once you knew how to hear it. Daniel nodded once, then turned back to the officers. "Who initiated this?" he asked. No one answered at first. The crowd, beyond the barrier, had gone almost completely silent now, listening with the uneasy intensity of people realizing they were no longer witnessing a vague incident, but the exposure of something ugly and undeniable. Phones remained raised, recording every second. Hayes finally spoke, but the confidence from earlier was gone. "Sir, there was a concern about unauthorized access to a restricted area." Daniel did not blink. "Then why was her credential not verified?" Hayes opened his mouth, then closed it. Monica answered instead, her voice tight with shame. "It was in the system. She was checked at the entrance. She was cleared." Daniel let that settle in the air. Not because he needed clarification, but because he wanted everyone around them to live for one full second inside the truth they had tried to outrun. Naomi stood beside him, composed as ever, though her eyes had gone quieter now, deeper somehow, as if the night had reached inside her and touched an old bruise no title or marriage could erase. Imagine standing there, under city lights and patriotic banners, dressed for a concert, doing everything right, and still being treated like you needed permission to belong. Imagine how many people do not have a mayor walking into the frame before it is too late. That thought moved through Naomi like a second pulse. Daniel seemed to feel it too, because when he spoke again, the anger in his voice was no longer personal alone. It had widened into something larger, colder, and far more dangerous to everyone who had failed her. This did not happen because she was unclear, he said. This happened because none of you believed she belonged here in the first place. And for the first time all night, no one in that lane had a single word to hide behind. The silence after Daniel's words did not feel empty. It felt exposed, like the whole lane had been stripped down to what it really was. No slogans, no music, no polished city branding left to soften the truth. Officer Hayes stood under the spill of the security lights with every trace of certainty drained from his face. The crowd beyond the barrier, which had once hummed with judgment and curiosity, now held a different energy entirely. It was the uneasy stillness of people realizing they had watched something wrong unfold in real time and had done little more than lift their phones. Naomi flexed her fingers once, slowly, bringing warmth back into her hands while Daniel remained beside her, close enough to steady the air around her without speaking over her pain. Monica Reed pressed a hand to her headset again, her voice sharp and professional now, the voice of someone trying desperately to restore order after failing to prevent humiliation. "I want internal affairs notified tonight," Daniel said, still looking at Hayes and Cole. "Not tomorrow morning. Not after a press cycle. Tonight." One of the city security officers gave a tight nod and stepped away to make the call. Hayes tried once more to gather himself inside the wreckage of his authority. "Sir, with respect, I was responding to a security concern." Daniel turned fully toward him then, and the disappointment in his face somehow landed harder than anger would have. "A security concern would have required verification," he said. "What you acted on was assumption." Travis lowered his eyes. He knew it. Monica knew it. Even some of the people behind the barrier knew it now, though knowledge after the fact had a way of arriving far too clean compared to the damage already done. Naomi looked toward the crowd and saw a woman slowly lower her phone, shame washing over her face. A man who had been whispering earlier now stared at the pavement. Another person kept recording, perhaps sensing that consequence had become its own form of spectacle. That was the cruelty of public disgrace. First they watched you be diminished. Then they watched the ones responsible begin to fall. Daniel extended his hand toward Naomi's clutch, which Monica hurried over and placed into it before he returned it gently to his wife. The small gesture nearly broke her more than the handcuffs had. Not because of the purse itself, but because it reminded her how ordinary this night was supposed to be. Music, city lights, one summer concert, nothing more. Instead, it had become another reminder that even grace could be mistaken for trespass when carried by the wrong woman in the wrong eyes. "Naomi," Daniel said softly, giving her the choice that had been denied all evening. "Would you like to leave?" She looked at him, then at the officers, then at the banners fluttering overhead. The words printed on them caught the light in bright patriotic colors. One city, one future, together. The irony was almost unbearable. Naomi drew a slow breath and lifted her chin. "Not yet," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I am not leaving this lane as if I did something shameful." The statement moved through the gathered crowd like a second shockwave. Daniel's expression softened with pride and grief at once. Monica straightened. Even Travis looked up. Naomi stepped forward by a single pace, reclaiming the ground where she had been humiliated, and turned so the phones, the staff, the officers, and the bystanders could all see her face clearly. She was not trembling now. She was not hiding. "You embarrassed me in public," she said, her eyes fixed on Hayes. "But the worst part is that you would have kept going if no one important had arrived." Hayes swallowed hard, but said nothing. There was nothing left to say that would not sound smaller than the truth. Naomi glanced briefly at Daniel before facing the crowd again. "The problem is not that you arrested the mayor's wife," she said. "The problem is that you were comfortable arresting a black woman you never bothered to understand." No one cheered. No one interrupted. The music from the concert rolled on behind them, distant now, almost unreal, while that single sentence settled over the lane with the weight of judgment. And in that moment the night stopped belonging to the officers who had tried to control it. It belonged to the woman they had tried to erase, standing taller than their authority, and to the truth that had finally forced its way into the light. By the time the final song ended, the story had already left the concert grounds and entered the city like wildfire. The videos spread first through text messages, then local blogs, then every corner of social media where outrage travels faster than facts, but never stays interested for long unless the truth is sharp enough to cut through the noise. This truth was, by midnight, the footage of Naomi standing in handcuffs beneath city banners was everywhere. By 1 o'clock in the morning, screenshots of Officer Hayes and Travis Cole had been clipped, reposted, slowed down, analyzed, and argued over by strangers who had never set foot in that concert lane but knew injustice when they saw it. By dawn, the city that had spent months promoting unity through music was waking up to a different kind of headline entirely. Naomi did not sleep much that night. She sat in the quiet of her living room with a cup of tea gone cold between her hands, still wearing the same navy dress, still hearing the metallic click that had followed her home like an echo. Daniel had taken calls for hours from council members, police leadership, donors, reporters, and legal advisors. But sometime after 2 in the morning, he stopped answering the phone and simply sat beside her in silence. It was the only thing that felt honest. There are some humiliations words cannot immediately soften. Some wounds are not visible on the skin, but they still leave marks all the same. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the city manager announced that Officer Ryan Hayes had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation and that Officer Travis Cole had been removed from active event duty until a full review was completed. The police chief issued a statement about protocol, professionalism, and public trust, but it sounded thin against the footage everyone had already seen with their own eyes. Monica Reed released a public apology on behalf of the event organizers, her voice tight with regret as she admitted that Naomi's credentials had been valid from the start. Internal Affairs opened a formal inquiry before noon. But none of that was the moment people remembered most. The moment they remembered came later that afternoon, when Naomi stepped to a podium outside City Hall, cameras waiting, microphones angled toward her, the summer heat rising off the stone steps in shimmering waves. Daniel stood behind her, not in front of her. That mattered. This was her voice now. Her truth. Her ground. Naomi looked out. At the press, at the cameras, at the citizens gathered beyond the barricades. And for a second the city seemed to hold its breath again, just as it had the night before. She was elegant as ever, composed as ever, but there was something new in her stillness now. Not fragility. Authority. Not borrowed from office, not granted by marriage, but forged by surviving what too many others were expected to endure quietly. I do not stand here today because I am the mayor's wife, she said, each word measured and clear. I stand here because what happened to me happens to people every day who do not have cameras, titles, or someone powerful arriving in time to stop it. A murmur moved through the crowd, not loud, but deep. Naomi let the silence follow her sentence before she continued. Last night was not painful because of who I am married to. It was painful because I was treated as if my dignity depended on who I was connected to. Behind the cameras, some people lowered their eyes. Others nodded slowly, the kind of nod that comes when truth stops being comfortable and starts becoming undeniable. Naomi did not call for revenge. She called for change. Mandatory bias training. New verification standards at public events. Body camera review policies. Real accountability when assumption replaces procedure. She asked the city to become more honest than its slogans and more human than its systems had been to her. And when she stepped away from the podium, no applause came at first, only silence, the heavy kind that meant people were still absorbing the weight of what had been said. Then, slowly, the clapping began. Not because justice was finished, but because someone had finally refused to let humiliation have the last word. Officer Hayes had worn a badge and believed it gave him the power to decide who belonged. Naomi carried no badge at all, only truth. And in the end, truth did what power could not. It stayed standing. It stayed visible. It stayed remembered. He thought authority made him untouchable. But that night, the city learned something far more powerful than fear. When dignity refuses to kneel, justice no longer needs permission to rise.